Hi, everyone. This is a very big room, slightly scary. So thank you for being here today, and also want to take the opportunity to thank you, our organizer, for giving us the opportunity to talk today to you, to such a nice crowd. My name is Jacopo Lanzoni. I'm head of development at AppFox. We are based in Reading, not far from London, in the UK.
Yeah, and I'm Peter Hall. I am a software engineering team lead at AppFox.
Fantastic. So what we want to tell you today is a little bit a story. It's similar to the story told you by Cyber's Julian Wolf yesterday. It's our view on moving one of our applications, compliance for Confluence, from Connect, where we initially developed it, to Forge. During this talk, we will tell you a little bit of the context, or maybe how we saw the context of the moving platform in Atlassian, why we didn't move our app to Forge earlier. We want to tell you a little bit more about the pivot moment when we decided to start the migration journey and why. And then we want to give you a little bit of insight around the delivery. We use the present tense literally because we are moving the app to Forge in these days. So we want to tell you what went well, what we found out, what we hoped could go even smoother. Let's start with the context then. Now, Forge was launched by Atlassian in 2021, and it was quite clear from the very beginning that it was going to be the best platform, the best technical solution for any new applications. From the very beginning, this is a list of features I believe that were already provided by Forge in 2021 when it was launched. Starting from GDPR, secure storage, async processing. There were lots of features which were already marking and marketing Forge as the best solution for new apps. From our point of view, to summarize all of these, the two obvious main benefits were that as head of engineering team, I didn't have to care about any infrastructure, whether it was the creation, the maintenance, the cost. And with a more commercial point of view, we didn't have any customer data we needed to store and protect and guarantee a certain level of standards in data management to our customers. Now, I'm going to take a step back and tell you a sub-story about another app, not the main app, Pete will tell you later, which is compliance. We have another app called Optimizer for Jira. Optimizer for Jira was launched in June 2017. It's actually the birth year of AppFox itself. It was our first app. We launched it in 2017 as a server app, Optimizer for Jira Server. The year after, in 2018, we launched Optimizer for Jira Cloud built on Connect. The year after, in September the same year, the year after the launch, we extended Optimizer for Jira Server to support also Optimizer to support Jira Data Center. And then when Forge came out in 2021, we believed so strongly that it was going to be the platform of the future that we went through the process of rewriting from scratch our Optimizer for Jira Cloud in Forge. By the end, and still is in Forge today, where we, but by all means, probably will qualify as a hands-on Atlassian application. As you can guess, by the end of 2023, we had one product, Optimizer for Jira, one business idea, one set of features, one problem we wanted to solve for customers, but we had 4 different platforms. We had a shared that data center and server solution. We had Jira Cloud on Connect that we were still maintaining for the customer, which still were on Connect, and Optimizer for Jira Cloud Forge. So you can understand what the cost is, especially for a company like ours. We are today 20 engineers strong, but we are not a massive company like other of our partner in the marketplace. It was a big cost. I'll pass it back to Peter for some insight on compliance. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. So I'd like to introduce you to Compliance for Confluence. This is another one of the products that AppFox look after. This is our data loss prevention tool. We originally launched this in 2018, so it's a little bit younger than Optimizer. It's actually celebrating its 7th birthday this month, so it's just about reaching the age where it's going to get in trouble at school for telling the other kids that Santa Claus isn't real. It's got 2 key features. The first is page classification. So with this, you can assign a classification level to a page, and then there will automatically be some visibility restrictions associated to that, which again are configurable by the admin. So for example, you could say, I'm classifying this page as HR level, and then that can be set up so that only users in certain groups are able to see it. The other key feature that it has is sensitive data detection. So this involves scanning for things like credit card numbers, email addresses, those sorts of things. So these 2 key features are also linked by a third feature, which is the what we call automation rules. And so when sensitive data is detected, you can also automatically assign a classification level to the page based on that. And again, this is fully configurable. And there are also other things you can do as a consequence of sensitive data being detected. So there's sort of a couple of sort of consequences of these features which have been baked into the product from the start. So the first is that we've got a complex network of related entities stored in a relational database. So right from the very start, this product was built around an SQL database. And also the sensitive data detection, that runs in a couple of ways. It can either happen automatically when a page is edited, so the scan gets kicked off and anything that needs to happen happens immediately, or it can be ran as a bulk process. So you might want to run this overnight, for example. And in the case where there's a particularly large instance, we would expect this to take quite a long time. If we're talking of the scale of tens of thousands of spaces, tens of thousands of pages. So what's happened as a result of these particular technical requirements is that, sorry, wind back a bit. No. I'll get to that in a minute. Sorry, pardon me. Let me first just talk you through the timeline of the application. So as I say, we first launched it in February 2018, and this was running for Compliance Server. And then later on in that year, we also created a cloud version, which was based on Connect, obviously, because that's what was available at the time. In August 2019, so the following year, we also made it compatible with Confluence Data Center. But then at this point, we have a question mark, because we have not yet completed the migration to Forge as we have done with Optimizer. It's worth mentioning that by this stage, the product's quite mature. We've got hundreds of customers. We have a backlog full of feature requests. And so that is something that keeps us occupied with our developer time. So looking back at what the pros and cons were of a Forge migration at about the same time that we were migrating Optimizer to Forge, we could see that there were some big advantages, obviously. Data ownership is a big one. And this was talked about in the talk by CD Projekt Red this morning. They were saying about how an application that runs on Atlassian feels they have a lot more confidence in that, because they don't have to look into what the data processes of the individual vendor are. They can just trust Atlassian to deal with that. So that's a big pro for us as well. We don't have to worry about those particular aspects of data governance. And as Jacopo said earlier, the managed architecture is, a big draw as well. From our perspective, we don't have to think about how we set up the infrastructure. We don't have to think about maintaining it. That's just one headache that goes away entirely. But there are some cons, and this is the thing that I was trying to talk about earlier. Firstly, there was no support for long-running tasks at the time. At the time, you could run a task for a maximum of 60 seconds. That's now increased to 15 minutes, but that's still not enough to scan all of the pages for a particularly large instance for the different types of sensitive data. So immediately, that's a big problem, a big thing to look out for. The second, as I mentioned before, is built around a relational database. So if we were going to migrate to Forge at the time, we'd need to think about two things. The first is rewriting our data access layer to support data stored in a different structure. And the other is migrating our data. We would have to think about writing that script to perform the data migration. That wasn't a problem with Optimizer because Optimizer works in a slightly different way. All of the data that's stored in Optimizer is ephemeral. And so from our perspective, there was no big downside to just throwing all that data away and regenerating it within Forge. But that wouldn't be the case for compliance. We need to hold on to that data. And of course, there's just the cost of rewriting the app. We discovered with Optimizer, it took a long time to rewrite it for Forge. And so when we looked at compliance, the fact that we had all this backlog of feature requests, all these customers to look after, at the time we just couldn't justify all the investment that would take. So tell us about the pivot, Jacopo.
Thank you, Pete. Now, Peter gave you a fairly concise but clear overview of all the reasons why we decided not to move to Forge until last year. What I would like to try to do now is giving you a flavor of what changed. And, well, the summary could be we've been forced, but that's not the full story. So definitely we saw in 2024 an increase in the efforts that Atlassian put into making our life as partners easier. It was clear, I was trying to say earlier, how Forge, from the beginning, was clearly the best option for new partners or existing partners launching a new app. Still, as partner with existing apps, we found that the ecosystem up to 2024 was quite difficult because the cost of rewriting an application from scratch is not something you start working on quite easily. You probably are familiar with the subtitle of this slide, Incrementally Adopting Forge from Connect. It's the title of, I guess, fairly popular page in the Atlassian documentation page. I think everyone in our company has read a dozen of times. And it captures a number of options and possibilities which helps partners driving their applications to Forge. Probably the first argument we found very convincing was the availability of new integration points for applications. There is a number of features requested in our backlog, which will be either possible or easier to develop or nicer once developed with the new integration points that Atlassian is providing through Forge. There is also the immediate app updates to our customers. Now, I don't know how much experience you have of changing the connector of an existing app, but we have done it a few times and we had to spend basically the weekend working because it takes 36 hours to roll out globally. And in a number of cases where we had to do changes to our connectors, we didn't have any other option than disabling a feature in the UI rolling back our changes and re-enabling that feature in the UI 36 hours after, which is obviously not something you want to do regularly. And then Forge functions, the Forge UI modules, and a number of other features. These made everything much sweeter for us. Also, I must say, very honestly, we weren't yet convinced 100%. And this is not trying to praise the organizer of the event, what really helped us was a meeting we held in November with Adarsh, Daniel, Sean, and Tim, who came to our offices and basically told us, why haven't you started moving your app? And we discussed, we spent a day, funnily enough, we were very busy discussing, so busy that we didn't take any pictures. So you have to do with a stock picture because we don't have any proof that that meeting had happened. We spent the afternoon talking about the Atlassian ecosystem. We had very genuine conversation around the difficulties we were facing and how with everything we needed to do as a medium-sized organization in a fairly active and competitor-rich market, transitioning to Forge wasn't a priority. The cost was too high, the benefit still low. And we were shown in that meeting how we could make our Connect app Forge. I think they claim in 2 minutes. And we did move an app into Forge in 2 minutes. It is so good. And there is a little bit of extra information that Peter will provide later. But I think one great take-home message for us was how the migration to Forge could be done incrementally, because we had not appreciated that in the number of changes and documentation and changelog entries that we had gone through. So we really appreciated the team taking the time to meet us and spending an afternoon discussing our need, because generally we missed some of the great tool Atlassian had developed last year for us. And now we are back to compliance, and Peter will show you how we put this concept into practice.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Jacopo said, our understanding of what Forge was changed hugely as a result of that meeting. The first thing is we understood now that there was a pathway for an iterative migration. We didn't need to rewrite the entire app in one go. And the first step towards that was potentially a very small one. So that was a big opportunity that leapt out at us. The second also is we understood that moving to Forge would unlock new features that Atlassian were going to bring, new services. A big one there being Rovo, of course. And we could immediately see the applicability of Rovo agents to compliance, thinking about the sensitive data detection. The way that sensitive data is currently detected within compliance works in sort of quite a rigid way. For example, you can write a regular expression to find a credit card number, but other slightly more arcane forms of sensitive data might not be able to be picked up in that way. That might be a place where a Rovo agent could really help us. However, there were still a couple of challenges, not insurmountable ones. The first is the documentation that was available. It's great in terms of telling you how to perform those commands for creating the Forge manifest from your connector. But some of the edge cases were perhaps not quite well so documented. To be honest, this isn't surprising, given that this is very much a new way of doing things that Atlassian are giving us. The documentation needs to be built out over time as people have different experiences as part of this transition. But the other, I don't know if it's necessarily a challenge, but I suppose the really big thing we learned out of this is refining our understanding of what Forge was, because to us in the past, Forge had always been synonymous with the idea of all of the infrastructure being hosted by Atlassian, all of the data being stored on Atlassian's server. And that was just so lodged in our minds. And This meeting, this discussion of the gradual migration was the point at which we thought, we've been looking at this wrong. This isn't what Forge is at all. This is what runs on Atlassian is. And so at the point at which we were able to take that definition of Forge as we understood it and reassign that to runs on Atlassian, that then creates the space in our minds to think of Forge as being something a little bit broader. Press the wrong button. There we go. So this is what the pros and cons table looked like after that meeting. In the pros, we've still got the managed architecture, we've still got the data ownership, which are hugely compelling. But we've now also got Forge SQL, which we talked about a little bit at that meeting. And so at this point, we're now thinking, the data migration isn't looking so bad. We don't need to rewrite our data access layer in a big way. We don't need to write a migration script that's going to turn a whole bunch of relational data into a bunch of key values stuff. We're going to basically just lift and shift that data in some way. Might be some small changes needed, but it doesn't seem anywhere near as scary anymore. And the key thing is that big rewrite of the entire app, that was no longer something that we needed to worry about. We were now in a situation where we could perform a few steps, within 2 minutes, within 2 minutes have our app running on Forge, and then start picking and choosing the bits of the app that we wanted to move across to be looked after by Atlassian. But there's still a big con, which is the long-running tasks. Once upon a time, we had a limit of 1 minute, never going to happen. Now it's 15 minutes, bit better, might be something we can do with that. But for now, at least, we do see that those long-running tasks will need to continue to be run on our infrastructure. But the overall weighting here has changed quite significantly. So we thought, let's do it. And then also, Atlas Camp was coming up, and it was like, would you like to do a talk on how you migrated? And we're like, yes, we'll need to actually do it if we're going to do the talk. So that's what we've been doing. These are the 5 simple steps that you may be familiar with if you've already read the documentation on adopting Forge from Connect. Firstly, you need to install the prerequisites and prepare your app. Second, you need to convert your descriptor to a manifest. This is the one-line command that Tim showed in the keynote yesterday, if you were there. The third is registering and deploying your app to Forge. Again, a really simple one-line command. Step 4, install your app to your development site. And step 5, review and agree to the Forge terms and DPA. So we put one of our best developers on this. That was just a coincidence, really. He was available at the time. But he also did have experience working on Forge. He was one of the people who'd worked a lot with Optimizer, so seemed like the right person for the task. So we put him on this, and we also asked him for his feedback on how he felt that those steps were. Were they simple? The first one was extremely simple, the installing of the prerequisites. That was almost trivial. The second and third steps, also quite simple. Installing the app to the development site has been a bit trickier. I'll go into some detail on that in a minute. And finally, reviewing and agreeing to the Forge terms and DPA. We didn't actually even read them. Just ticked the box. So this is the more complex problem we ran into. So I don't know if this is going to be applicable to your apps, but we make use of the app account ID to act as a sort of a service account to modify content as the app, not as a user in particular. And one of the things we discovered quite early on is that if we just migrated our app to Forge, then it would pick up a whole new account ID. So this one ID that we've had in our system as an environment variable could now potentially be one of 2 IDs, depending upon whether the user was still on Connect or whether they'd installed on Forge. And then we thought, but what happens if someone was on Connect and then upgraded to Forge? Would they see the old one or would they see the new one? So a little bit of doubt there. We also knew that we also saw that there was a page about persisting your account ID, which would allow you to continue using the Connect account ID even once the app is running on Forge, which looked interesting. We could see that this request would have to be made before we could first deploy our app to production. So this became a blocker in terms of actually getting our Forge version out there. And we could also see that this was going to be a manual process. We were going to need to raise a support ticket to do this. It wasn't going to be something that could be done entirely self-service. So we raised that ticket. We first asked the question, what happens in all of these various scenarios we can think of? What happens for a user who has migrated from Connect to Forge? What's going to happen in our staging environment? What's going to happen in our development environment? So let me start talking you through the timeline of this entire process. So we started on Thursday, the 9th of January. so about 3.5 weeks ago. We made really good progress initially. That's running the connector Forge migration, creating the manifest, all of this. And then on Friday was when we ran into this problem about the account IDs. So we opened a ticket with Atlassian and kind of for a while, just left that there while we got on with other stuff. Moving into the second week, the first full week, commencing the 13th, we started working on our CI/CD pipelines. We use GitHub. We use GitHub Actions to automatically deploy. As I've mentioned before, we already had an app that was using Forge, so we had a pretty good idea of what was going to be needed for compliance as well. So we got working on that. We got that set up so that it was going to deploy to staging automatically. And then by the end of the week, we also had it deploying to a test production environment. So what we basically did for this is the action that would ultimately deploy the app to our live production marketplace listing. One of our developers just used their account instead. So we could check that it was all working without actually affecting any real users. Atlassian still hadn't responded to the ticket yet. They'd acknowledged it, but hadn't been able to give us an answer yet. And sort of by this point, we were kind of blocked on going any further. And so the developer who'd been working on this worked on something else for a little bit. Going into the week commencing the 20th, we'd already resigned ourselves to the thought that we were going to need to support 2 possible account IDs. So we wrote the code to have that ready to go. Given that we felt it was going to be likely needed. And we did also agree to the Forge terms and DPA. Just for the sake of any ambiguity, yes, we did read them. That was a joke, but I'm sure you knew that already. Tuesday the 21st, that was when we finally got the response from Atlassian to our ticket, and we knew what we needed to do in terms of the account ID. The answer there was mostly good. In terms of our production site, that single account ID was going to continue to be usable. As far as our staging and development environments were concerned, for them, they would continue to use the new Forge ID. So we did need ultimately to have some logic to be able to switch between the two based on the scenario. At this point, then, we did run into another little problem, which was that mysteriously, the installs of this new Forge app weren't working. And the developer who was working on that kind of banged their head against that for a couple of days, trying to figure out what they'd done wrong. On the 22nd, on the Wednesday, Atlassian actually revealed that this was a known incident. It was nothing to do with what we were doing. And, in hindsight, we would have appreciated a little bit more heads up that was going on, because we did spend a bit of time. There's then a bit of a blank here, because there is a manual process. At the moment, there is a manual process required for Atlassian to approve this new Forge version. But again, you've probably you were at the talk yesterday where it was announced that as of next week, the new Forge version will actually be a minor upgrade, not a major upgrade, and therefore this will be a lot more seamless going forwards. So the delay that we've then run into hopefully won't affect anyone going through this in the future. When I last spoke to my colleagues yesterday afternoon, that hadn't yet been approved. So at this time, we haven't yet completed this migration, which is a bit of a shame. I would have loved to have been up here telling you, success story, you can now install the Forge version now, but you can't quite yet, unfortunately. So, last slide with any big information. What are the fun findings that we had out of this process? So the first point is the management of the multiple app account IDs. I've already told you a little bit about that. The second point is that we will need to continue to maintain a Connect app descriptor and a Forge manifest going forwards, because some users are going to be on the Connect version, some are going to be on the Forge version, and we need to make sure that any changes that we make to one, we also need to make to the other. Ultimately, we are hoping to get everyone off of the Connect version and onto the Forge version, at which point the Connect app descriptor will still remain, but it will contain a fraction of the amount of content it does at the moment, and so we won't have to worry about duplicate configuration between the two of them. So that kind of leads me on to point 3, which is we need to make sure that at some point all of our customers click that button to do the major version upgrade. So from a non-development point of view, we need to think about how we're going to encourage our customers to go ahead and complete that, because we don't want to be supporting users in these two different spaces for longer than we have to. We want to be able to start using the Forge-only features and know that everyone is able to benefit from them. And then, yeah, the final point on here is this 1 week delay for our major upgrade to be approved. And, again, based on the stuff that has been talked about over the last couple of days, we know that this isn't going to be such a problem going forward. But still, despite these little problems we've run into, we're still really excited about using this Forge version going forward. As Jacopo mentioned, this long wait that we've had to endure for the Connect descriptor to be rolled out globally, that's going to be a thing of the past. We're looking forward to using Rovo. We're looking forward to all of the other great things that Atlassian are going to start giving to apps that are on the Forge platform. So that's the end of our talk. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for the people at Atlassian for hosting us here and spending the time to talk to us about all the wonderful things that Forge can do. If you have any questions, then Jacopo would love to answer them.
Thank you.